David Chin stepped off the transport shuttle onto Kepler Station. His military uniform still pressed sharp despite 3 months of retirement. The station orbited Vega 9 like a metallic eye watching the endless stars. He had come here for one reason: to find something worth living for again. 20 years in the Terran Defense Force had left him wealthy but hollow. He had fought in 17 different star systems, commanded soldiers across hostile worlds, and won medals for bravery that now sat in a box collecting dust. But what had it all meant? He had spent 2 decades destroying things, killing enemies, watching good soldiers die. Now, at 47 years old, David had nothing but time and an empty house on a remote world called Caridian 7. The auction house was on level 12, deep in the station's trading district. It was a place where wealthy collectors came to buy and sell extraordinary things. Genetic specimens from extinct species, creatures engineered by ancient civilizations, rare animals from distant planets. Everything had a price. Everything could be owned. David entered the massive auction hall with its high ceilings and glass viewing platforms. Hundreds of people filled the seats, all waiting to bid on the lots being presented. The air was thick with anticipation and greed. Dealers whispered to each other. Rich merchants checked their credit accounts on small devices. Everyone wanted something they didn't have. The auctioneer, a tall woman named Rebecca, stood on the central platform calling out lot numbers and descriptions. Lot 32, she announced. Rare crystalline formation from the Kepler Nebula. Opening bid, 50,000 credits. Hands shot up immediately. The price climbed quickly. David sat in the back and watched. He had no interest in crystals or most of the other lots. He was waiting for lot 47. He had seen the catalog the night before. He had studied the images for hours. Something about it called to him in a way he couldn't explain. The afternoon dragged on. Lots came and went. A preserved alien organism. A collection of ancient star maps. A living creature from a world no longer mapped on any charts. Each one sold to the highest bidder, and the crowd cheered or nodded with satisfaction. Finally, Rebecca announced, "We come now to lot 47. This is something truly unique, ladies and gentlemen. A Draconis solidus. A dragon." The auction hall went silent. Every head turned toward the display platform. The dragon was enormous even in the protective containment field that held her. She had scales that were black as midnight, dark as the spaces between stars. Her wings were folded tight against her body. Her head was lowered, resting on her front legs. She appeared to be sleeping, but as David watched, her eye opened slightly. Golden. Intelligent. Where? The specimen is female, Rebecca continued, reading from her notes. Approximately 200 years old, based on skeletal analysis. The species Draconis solidus was created by the architects, the ancient civilization that disappeared from our galaxy 10,000 years ago. This dragon is one of only 3 known to exist anywhere in known space. David leaned forward. His heart was beating faster. However, Rebecca said, and her tone changed to something more serious, the specimen is in critical condition. Our veterinarians have determined that she is dying. The cause is unclear. Possibly genetic degradation, possibly loneliness, possibly both. Without intervention, she will not survive another 3 months. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some people lost interest. A dragon that was dying was less valuable. Others began calculating what the bones and scales might be worth as components. Additionally, Rebecca added, gesturing to a secondary display, this lot includes 5 eggs. Genetic analysis suggests these eggs are non-viable. The embryos do not show signs of development. They are presumed to be dead or inert. However, since they were laid by the dragon specimen, we are including them with the lot for no additional charge. David stared at the eggs. They were beautiful. Each one was the size of a football, with a shell that shimmered faintly in the light. They lay in stasis pods, suspended in some kind of preservation field. Opening bid on lot 47, Rebecca announced, is 100,000 credits. A few hands went up, but not many. A dragon that was dying was not a good investment. People wanted things that would increase in value. This dragon would only get weaker. The bidding stayed low. 120,000. 150,000. It stalled at 220,000. Several potential buyers dropped out, shaking their heads. David stood up. His hands felt shaky. This was not a smart decision. He was a retired soldier with more money than he knew what to do with, but throwing away credits on a dying dragon was wasteful. It was not logical. But logic had nothing to do with what he was feeling. 500,000 credits, David called out, his voice steady despite the nervous feeling in his chest. The auction hall turned to look at him. Rebecca blinked. The crowd started whispering. 500,000 credits? Rebecca repeated as if she had not heard correctly. That is an extraordinary opening bid for a dying specimen. Yes, David said simply. 500,000. The other bidders looked at each other. None of them wanted to compete. A dragon that was dying was not worth 500,000 credits to anyone else in this room. Going once, Rebecca said. Going twice. Sold to the gentleman in the back. 500,000 credits. The crowd applauded politely, though David sensed their confusion. He had just paid more for a dying creature than anyone had paid for anything else all day. As the containment field around the dragon deactivated, the creature lifted her head. She looked directly at David. Really looked at him. Not the look of an animal staring at a stranger. The look of someone intelligent. Someone conscious. Someone who understood what had just happened. The dragon's golden eyes held his for a long moment. In that look, David saw something he had not expected to find in this place. Hope. And something else. Trust. Lot 47 will be transported to your designated coordinates within 2 hours, Rebecca said. Congratulations on your purchase. David nodded, but he was not paying attention to the auctioneer. He was watching the dragon as technicians began preparing her for transport. Her scales caught the light as she moved. She was magnificent. Despite her weakness, despite her condition, she was the most beautiful thing David had ever seen. For the first time in 20 years, David Chin felt something shift inside his chest. He had found his reason to live. The transport shuttle descended through the atmosphere of Caridian 7, carrying David and his extraordinary cargo. Through the viewport, he could see his estate spread out below, a large compound surrounded by forests and open fields. He had purchased this land years ago, thinking he might retire here someday. Now that day had arrived, but not in the way he had imagined. The dragon lay in the secure containment pod behind him, still sedated from the journey. The 5 eggs rested in specially designed cradles, protected by cushioning systems that would keep them safe during the descent. David had spent the entire 2-hour transport ride making calculations, researching dragon biology, and wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. What was he going to do with a dying dragon? What did dragons eat? How did they sleep? Did they need special care, or would they simply fade away no matter what he did? The shuttle touched down on the landing platform outside his compound. David watched through the window as the cargo handlers carefully removed the containment pod and the egg cradles. He had paid them extra to be gentle, to treat the cargo as if it were made of crystal. They nodded and moved slowly, understanding that this was not ordinary cargo. David stepped out into the warm air of Caridian 7. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. A cool breeze moved through the surrounding trees. This world was peaceful. Quiet. Empty. Perfect for what he was about to attempt. Set up the containment pod in the main sanctuary, David instructed the handlers, pointing toward the largest building in the compound. And place the eggs in the climate-controlled chamber. Carefully. The handlers moved his cargo inside. David followed, his mind already racing ahead to what came next. The sanctuary was a large warehouse-style building that David had inherited with the property. Over the past 3 weeks, he had transformed it into something extraordinary. He had installed temperature control systems, lighting that could be adjusted to mimic any planet's natural cycles, water features, and open spaces where a creature could move freely. He had spent nearly 50,000 credits preparing this space. The dragon lay in the center of the sanctuary, still unconscious. She was even more magnificent now that David could see her up close without the auction house glass between them. Her scales were truly black, not dark gray or dark blue, but pure black like the color of space itself. They caught light in subtle ways, creating patterns that seemed to shift when David moved around her. The eggs go in the climate chamber, David told the handlers, pointing to a specially constructed room to the left. Put them on the suspended platforms. Make sure nothing disturbs them. The handlers carried the cradles carefully into the climate chamber. David had spent days preparing this room. He had studied ancient architect technology through forbidden databases. He had consulted with xenobiologists through anonymous channels, never revealing what he actually possessed. He had programmed temperature controls to cycle through specific patterns, humidity levels to fluctuate in precise ways, and nutrient distribution systems that would slowly release compounds into the air. Compounds that just might, feed the developing embryos inside the eggs. Most people would have said it was impossible. Eggs that showed no sign of development would never hatch. The dragon was dying. Nothing could change that. It was foolish to waste time and money trying. But David had spent 20 years in military operations. He understood that sometimes the impossible was simply something that nobody had tried hard enough to accomplish. By morning, the dragon still had not woken up. David sat beside her, monitoring her vital signs on equipment he had borrowed, carefully and secretly, from his old military connections. Her heart rate was weak. Her breathing was shallow. The sedatives from the auction were still in her system, but even accounting for that, she was struggling. David prepared food. He had researched dragon metabolism extensively. Their biology was closer to large predators than he had expected. He synthesized a protein-rich paste, supplemented with nutrients, vitamins, and compounds that might support her failing organs. It was not perfect, but it was the best he could do. On the second day, the dragon opened her eyes. She did not move or try to stand. She simply opened her golden eyes and looked directly at David. There was consciousness there. Intelligence. Awareness of her surroundings and of the human sitting beside her. "Hello," David said quietly. "You are safe. My name is David. You are going to be okay." He did not know if she understood his words, but he needed to say them anyway. He brought the food he had prepared closer. The dragon's nostrils flared. She smelled it. After a long moment, she lifted her head slightly and began to eat. David felt something relax inside his chest. She was eating. She was alive. She was trying. Over the next week, David worked around the clock. He barely slept. He fed the dragon every 6 hours, monitoring how much she ate and how she responded. He set up medical equipment to check her organ function. He studied every piece of data he could find about Draconis solida's biology. He took readings from the eggs, checking their temperature and the subtle energy signatures they produced. By day 7, the dragon could stand. Her legs were shaky, but she stood. She walked slowly around the sanctuary, exploring the space David had created for her. She drank water from the artificial pond. She seemed to understand that this place was meant for her. David named her Celeste. It felt right. She was magnificent and beautiful, like a star shining in the darkness. On day 12, something extraordinary happened. David was checking the egg chamber when he noticed something that made his heart stop. One of the eggs had a hairline fracture running across its surface. It was moving. Inside the egg, something was moving. David's hands shook as he pulled up the thermal imaging display. The embryo inside was active. Its heart rate was strong. It was alive. It had been alive the entire time, just waiting in the darkness, waiting for someone to believe in it enough to try. David moved back to the main sanctuary where Celeste stood. The dragon was looking at the egg chamber. She released a low rumble, deep and resonant. Not a roar. Something else. Something that sounded like hope. David understood. Somehow, across the impossible distance between their species, the mother dragon knew. Her babies were coming home. The first egg hatched on a Tuesday morning while David was sleeping. He woke to the sound of something cracking, a noise like ice breaking on a frozen lake. He rushed to the climate chamber and found the egg split open, shell fragments scattered across the suspended platform. And there, covered in clear fluid and trembling slightly, was a baby dragon. She was small, no larger than David's forearm. Her scales were a deep crimson color, bright and shining. Her eyes were enormous and dark, like pools of water reflecting starlight. She looked around the chamber with confusion and wonder, seeing the world for the first time. Then she saw David. The hatchling made a chirping sound, high and clear. She tried to stand on legs that barely worked, stumbling and falling back to the platform. She tried again, this time managing to get her tiny feet underneath her body. She looked at David, tilted her head, and chirped again. David felt his eyes fill with tears. He had never seen anything so small, so fragile, so impossibly beautiful. "Welcome," he whispered. "Welcome to the world." Over the next 8 days, the remaining 4 eggs hatched. Each one emerged into the world with the same confusion and wonder. Each one looked for Celeste first, finding comfort in their mother's presence. And each one, after bonding with Celeste, turned their attention to David. He named them carefully. The first hatchling, the crimson one, he called Eva. The second was a brilliant blue and deep, thoughtful. David named him Henry. The third was orange and playful, constantly exploring and tumbling over his own feet. Oliver seemed perfect for him. The fourth was silver with hints of gold, fierce and protective even at her tiny size. Charlotte claimed that name immediately. The last to hatch was the smallest of all, pale green with darker markings. Eleanor emerged last, as if she was taking her time to observe the world before joining it fully. 5 hatchlings. 5 perfect, impossible hatchlings. Celeste watched over them all with protective intensity. She cleaned them with her massive tongue. She taught them to walk. She curled around them at night, keeping them warm with her body heat. But something extraordinary began to happen almost immediately. The hatchlings did not ignore David. They were drawn to him. Eva would follow him when he walked through the sanctuary, her tiny claws clicking on the stone floor. Henry would sit beside him for hours, watching everything David did with intense focus. Oliver would pounce on David's boots and wrap his small tail around David's legs. Charlotte positioned herself between David and anything she perceived as a threat, even her own siblings if they got too close to him. Eleanor observed David constantly, studying him the way a scholar might study an ancient text, trying to understand something fundamental. David realized something was happening that he did not fully understand. The hatchlings were bonding with him not as a caretaker or food source, but as family. As something more fundamental than that. He began to narrate everything he did, speaking constantly to the young dragons as he moved through the sanctuary. "This is food," he would say, preparing their meals. "You need this to grow strong and healthy. See how I mix the proteins with the nutrients? This keeps your bodies working properly. Now we play," he would announce, dragging a rope toy across the floor. "Playing helps you develop your muscles and your mind. Time to rest," he would say softly as evening approached. "Your bodies need sleep to grow. Rest now, little ones." And something impossible began to happen. The hatchlings started to repeat his words. Started with Eva. She was playing with Oliver when David brought their afternoon meal. "Breakfast time," David said. Eva paused, her head tilting. She opened her mouth and released a sound that was almost like human speech. "Break, fast." David froze. He must have imagined it. Dragons could not speak human language. Their vocal apparatus was completely different. Their brains were not structured for human speech patterns. But then Oliver made a sound too. Pro-tines. Pro-tines. Day after day the vocalizations became clearer. More intentional. The hatchlings were not just making random sounds anymore. They were trying to copy David's words. They were learning. One afternoon, Oliver looked directly at David and said, with clear pronunciation and obvious intention, "Oliver, play, now?" David's hands began to shake. He sat down on the floor, unable to stand. Oliver waddled over to him and nudged his face with his small snout. "Play? Play? Dad." The word hung in the air between them. "Dad." "Yes," David said, his voice cracking. "Yes, I will play, Oliver." Within weeks, all 5 hatchlings could form simple sentences. Eva was the most eloquent, stringing together complex thoughts. Henry spoke carefully and precisely. Oliver talked constantly about play and food. Charlotte spoke in short, protective declarations. Eleanor spoke rarely but always with purpose, saying exactly what she meant. Celeste watched all of this with golden eyes that gleamed with something David could not quite name. Pride, perhaps. Or recognition of something fundamental that was occurring. One evening, David sat in the center of the sanctuary surrounded by his 5 hatchlings. They curled around him, their scales warm against his body. Eva rested her small head on his lap. Henry settled against his side. Oliver dozed in his arms. Charlotte kept watch from nearby. Eleanor sat nearby, her intelligent eyes studying the scene. Celeste approached slowly and lowered herself to the ground beside them. Her massive head came to rest near David's shoulder. She made a low sound, deep and resonant. Not threatening. Something else. Something that sounded like acceptance. Like love. David reached out and touched her scales. They were warm and smooth, and beneath them he could feel the power of her muscles, the strength of her ancient body. She had arrived at his sanctuary broken and dying. Now she was healing. Her scales shone brighter each day. Her movements were stronger. Her eyes held hope instead of despair. And her children called David father. In that moment, surrounded by 5 sleeping hatchlings and 1 enormous dragon, David understood something he had not felt in 20 years of military service. He understood what it meant to create instead of destroy. To nurture instead of wound. To be part of something that was growing and healing and becoming. He had spent 2 decades taking lives in defense of humanity. Now he was building life in defiance of despair. He had found his family. The message came through David's personal communication system on a quiet morning. He was in the sanctuary feeding the hatchlings when the emergency alert sounded. Red lights flashed across his screen. Priority Level 1. Military Authorization Code Alpha 7. David's stomach tightened. He had not heard from the Terran Defense Force since his retirement 3 months ago. They had no reason to contact him now. He opened the message. It was from Commander Sarah Mitchell, the head of the Defense Force Strategic Division. The message was brief but carried the weight of urgency. "Chin. We need to talk about what you have. Classified facility. Immediate transport arranged. This is not a request. David looked at the hatchlings playing around him. Eva was attempting to catch Oliver in some kind of game. Henry watched calmly from a corner. Charlotte kept alert as always. Eleanor observed everything with her usual intensity. Celeste lay near the water feature, her golden eyes tracking every movement in the sanctuary. David did not respond to the message. Instead, he went about his day as normal. He fed the dragons. He cleaned the sanctuary. He played with the hatchlings, teaching them new words and strengthening the bonds that had formed over the past 6 weeks. But he was worried. The military did not simply reach out without reason. Somehow they had discovered what he possessed. 2 days later, the transport ships arrived. David was outside the compound when he saw them descending through the atmosphere. Large military vessels, sleek and dangerous. They landed on the field beyond his property, kicking up clouds of dust. Soldiers emerged, dozens of them, all wearing tactical gear and carrying weapons. A figure stepped forward from the lead transport. It was Commander Sarah Mitchell herself. She was tall, with gray threading through her dark hair and a face marked by years of military decisions. She approached David with several officers flanking her. "David Chen," she said. "Good to see you again." "Commander," David replied, keeping his voice neutral. "This is quite a surprise." "I imagine it is," Mitchell said. "We need to discuss the creatures you purchased at the Kepler Station auction. A Draconis Solitas dragon and 5 eggs." David's heart began to race. That information was supposed to be confidential. The auction house guarantees privacy. "The auction house's privacy protections do not extend beyond our intelligence gathering," Mitchell said calmly. "We have satellites monitoring major trading hubs. We have agents everywhere. It was only a matter of time before we identified what you bought and where you took it." David said nothing. "We have been searching for functional Draconis Solitas specimens for decades," Mitchell continued. "The species was engineered by the architects for combat purposes. If we can understand their biology, if we can unlock what makes them work, we could revolutionize our military capabilities. The Zernathi have been attacking our colonies on the frontier. They have destroyed 17 settlements in the past month alone. They are killing our people." David understood where this was going. "We need those dragons," Mitchell said. "All of them. The adult and the hatchlings. We need them for research, yes, but more importantly, we need them for military applications. We need to weaponize them." "No," David said simply. Mitchell blinked. "I do not think you understand what I am offering. You would be compensated. You would be given access to our research facilities. You could contribute to the survival of humanity itself." "I said no," David repeated. "The dragons are mine. They are my responsibility. They are my family." Mitchell's expression hardened. She made a gesture to the soldiers. They began advancing toward the compound, weapons ready. David stood his ground, blocking the entrance. "You cannot do this," David said. "This is my private property. You have no legal authority here." "We have military authorization under emergency protocols," Mitchell said. "The Zernathi threat supersedes civilian property rights. Now step aside or we will move you aside." The soldiers surrounded David. Their weapons were not pointed directly at him, but they were ready. One wrong move and this would become violent. Then Eva appeared in the doorway behind David. She was larger now, more than double the size she had been even a week ago. Her scales shimmered in the sunlight. She made a sound, not a hatchling's chirp, but something deeper and more resonant. A sound that carried meaning. "No," Eva said, her voice clear and articulate. "Dad stays. We protect Dad." The soldiers froze. Several of them stepped back instinctively. Mitchell's eyes widened. The dragon spoke. It spoke in English. "I told you," David said quietly. "They are not weapons. They are sentient. They are intelligent. They are family." Henry emerged next, standing beside Eva. His voice was calm and measured. "Dad is ours. You cannot take him." Oliver bounded out, his tail held high. "No. No, take Dad. Oliver, protect Dad." Charlotte took position in front of David, her small body rigid with protective intensity. "I will hurt anyone who touches him." Finally, Eleanor stepped forward slowly, her pale green scales catching the light. She looked directly at Mitchell and spoke with unusual clarity. "You do not understand. We choose him. He chose us. That makes him ours. That makes us his. You cannot break what we are." Then Celeste emerged from the sanctuary. She was enormous, terrifying in her beauty and power. She spread her massive wings, each one the size of a small shuttle. She positioned herself beside her hatchlings and looked at Mitchell with golden eyes that held thousands of years of ancient intelligence. Celeste released a sound that was not language but was understood by everyone present. It was the sound of a mother protecting her family. It was the sound of power held in absolute control, waiting only for the moment to be unleashed. Mitchell took a step back. Then another. The soldiers behind her shifted nervously, their hands tightening on their weapons, but none of them moved forward. "Stand down," Mitchell commanded finally, her voice quiet. She was staring at the dragons with an expression David could not quite read. Shock perhaps. Or wonder. Or the sudden realization that she was looking at something that transcended her understanding of power and control. The soldiers lowered their weapons and began backing away. "You understand what you are refusing?" Mitchell asked David. "You understand the lives that could be saved if we had access to these creatures?" "I understand," David said. "But these dragons are not tools. They are not weapons. They are living beings with the capacity for love and loyalty and choice. And they have chosen to protect me. That means something. That means everything." Mitchell stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked back toward the transport ships. "Stand down," she commanded again. "We are leaving." As the military vessels lifted off into the sky, David stood surrounded by his dragons. Eva pressed against his leg. Oliver nuzzled his hand. Henry and Charlotte stood alert, watching the ships disappear into the clouds. Eleanor watched with calm observation. Celeste lowered her massive head and touched it gently to David's shoulder. The human and the dragons had chosen each other over power itself. And in that choice they had changed everything. Someone on Commander Mitchell's transport had recorded the entire encounter. The dragons speaking English. Eleanor's calm declaration about choice and family. Celeste spreading her wings in protection. The military backing down. The video was uploaded to every major network, every communication hub, every planet and station connected to the Galactic Information System. Within a day it had been viewed more than 5 billion times. The title read, "Dragons Call Human Dad, Military Backs Down." News anchors across known space debated what they were seeing. Scientists argued about the biology. Philosophers discussed the implications. Religious leaders questioned what this meant for civilization itself. But the message was universal and undeniable. The dragons loved the human. They had chosen family over power. They had chosen him over everything. David received messages from everywhere. Universities wanted to study the dragons. Governments wanted to negotiate. Private collectors offered obscene amounts of money. Religious organizations wanted the dragons declared sacred. Military forces from a dozen different species sent formal inquiries. David ignored all of it. Instead he focused on his family. Eva, Henry, Oliver, Charlotte, and Eleanor continued to grow. By the end of the first month after the military confrontation, they were nearly as large as their mother. Their scales had taken on permanent coloration now. Eva's crimson deepened to the color of ancient blood. Henry's blue became the shade of deep ocean water. Oliver's orange gleamed like captured sunlight. Charlotte's silver reflected light like polished metal. Eleanor's pale green took on hints of gold that seemed to shift in different illuminations. They were magnificent. But more importantly, they continued to develop their language. They did not just mimic David's words anymore. They created their own sentences. They asked questions. They expressed emotions and desires and opinions. One evening, as David sat with them in the sanctuary, Eva asked him something that made his heart ache. "Dad," she said carefully, "why did those people want to take us? Did we do something wrong?" David gathered her small head in his hands. "No, my love. You did nothing wrong. They wanted to take you because they thought you could help them win a war. They saw your strength and wanted to use it." "We are strong," Henry observed calmly. "But we would not want to hurt anyone. We only want to protect you. Is that wrong?" "No," David said. "That is not wrong. That is love. That is family." Oliver looked up from where he was playing with a rope toy. Then why did they not understand that? Why did they not understand family? David could not answer that question. He simply pulled Oliver close and held him. Charlotte, ever protective, moved to David's side. "If they come back, we will make them understand. We will show them that you are ours and we will not let anyone take what is ours." "I know," David said. "I know you will protect me. And I will always protect you." Eleanor, as always, said nothing for a while. She simply observed the scene with her intelligent eyes. Then quietly she spoke. "The video changed things. People are watching now. People are listening. We are not weapons anymore in their minds. We are something else. Something they do not have a word for yet. David realized she was right. 3 weeks after the video spread across the galaxy, David received an official communication. It was not from the military. It was from the Galactic Council, a body of representatives from hundreds of different species that had governed interstellar affairs for 3 centuries. The message was from Chancellor Olivia Reed, a human representative who had served on the council for 20 years. David, the message began, what you have accomplished is extraordinary. The entire galaxy is watching. The Zernathi have suspended their attacks on human colonies. What? Because they have realized that humanity possesses something they do not understand. Something they cannot predict. Something they cannot control. That something is you and your dragons. We would like to offer you a position of significant responsibility and resources. We would like you to establish a research and preservation facility on Caridian 7. We would like to study the dragons and understand how they develop the capacity for cross-species bonding and language acquisition. But more importantly, we would like you to search for other dormant genetic lines. Other creatures that the architects left behind. Other possibilities for connection and understanding. You would have unlimited funding. The finest scientists. Complete autonomy in your decisions. And most importantly, your dragons would remain free. They would remain your family. This is not a request to militarize them. This is a request to understand them. To learn from them. To let them teach us something new. What do you say? David read the message 3 times. He looked at his dragons, at Celeste watching over her children with protective golden eyes, at Eva curled against his leg, at the others playing and exploring the sanctuary he had built for them. We accept, he said into the recording device. But on one condition. My family comes first. Always. The research and the facility exist to serve them, not the other way around. The dragons are free beings. If at any point they choose to leave, they leave. If they choose not to participate in research, they do not. They are not specimens. They are citizens of this galaxy now, with all the rights and protections that implies. The response came within hours. Agreed. Over the following 6 months, David oversaw the construction of the most advanced research and preservation facility ever built. It was not a laboratory or a prison. It was a sanctuary that expanded into a small city. Scientists from hundreds of worlds came to study the dragons, but always with respect and always with the dragons' consent. Other genetic specimens were discovered in storage vaults across the galaxy. Some were dormant, like Celeste's eggs had been. David and his team worked carefully to awaken them, to understand them, to help them find their place in a galaxy that was changing. Most importantly, they taught others what the dragons had taught them. That intelligence and consciousness existed in forms no one had expected. That bonding transcended species. That family was not determined by genetics but by choice. One evening years later, David stood on an observation platform overlooking the sanctuary. Eleanor approached him. She was now massive, nearly as large as her mother. She had taken on a role as a teacher, helping other awakened creatures understand the new world they inhabited. Dad, she said, settling beside him, do you remember the auction? When you found us? Every day, David replied, running his hand along her scales. I have been thinking, Eleanor continued, about what I said when those people tried to take us. I said you let us find you. But that is not correct. You found us first. You believed in us when everyone else had given up. You gave us a chance to exist. David felt tears running down his face. Eleanor wrapped her massive wing around him, holding him the way he had held her when she was small enough to fit in his arms. Thank you for finding us, Dad, she said softly. Thank you for choosing us. Thank you for teaching us that family is the strongest power in the universe.